Welcome to the Primal Foundations podcast. I'm your host, Tony Pascola. Today we have a very special guest, James Leman, also better known by his Instagram handle as the Carnivorist. James is the host of the widely acclaimed Carnivorist Chats podcast, which educates listeners on the benefits of the carnivore diet, low oxalates, and a low-carb lifestyle. James brings a unique perspective to the table, having navigated through the challenges of vegetarianism and veganism. Faced with severe health issues, James decided to take control of his life through dedicated research and the adaptation of a ketogenic and carnivore diet. Not only has he overcome health hurdles, but also emerged as an advocate for holistic well-being and living a healthy lifestyle. James, welcome to the show.
Tony, it is so great to see you, my friend. What an honor and a privilege it's to be on the podcast with you. It's been a while since we last chatted, so I'm so thankful. And thank you for that introduction, man. I'm really proud to be on the Primal Foundations podcast with you.
Yeah, we're honored to have you. I think the last time we actually kind of messaged back and forth, you were in the middle of a hurricane.
Yeah, it's been an unprecedented year for us here in Bermuda. By the way, for your listeners, that's where I'm coming to you today. I was born and raised in the beautiful island of Bermuda. And yeah, this season, Tony, it's been crazy. We've had basically a storm every weekend for the entire month of September. And it was just unheard of. I think it's because it's if it's La Nina this season, so it's sending a lot of the hurricanes up our way. So we've been dodging them, but luckily our infrastructure here in Bermuda, the way our houses are built, we're pretty accustomed to and used to strong windstorms. So all good, man. I'm just happy we could finally connect.
Yeah, and I look back, and for the listeners that don't know, I had the wonderful opportunity to be on your podcast, and that was January of 2023. So this is almost a year ago that we got to like sit down and talk like this. And I re-listened to that podcast just to kind of just see where we kind of left off. And the last thing that I was talking about was, you're like, what are you going to do? And what's Tony doing in the next 5 years? And I was like, I haven't really talked about this, but I kind of want to do a podcast. I want to do a website. I want to do online stuff. And lo and behold, here I am doing it. And thank you to you, because you were one of the first people I contacted. Like, I think I'm going to do this. I need help though. And you were just like, I got you. Let's get on a Zoom call. And we chatted. And even like most of my setup is all the things that you talk, get this camera's a good camera. This is all this. I said, okay, in the Amazon cart, let's go, and like deliver the next day. And I was 2 feet in, but thank you for all the things that you do. And thank you for taking the time to help me start my podcast.
Man, it was such a pleasure, man. And anything that I can do to help folks, it kind of ties in neatly to what we're going to talk about in terms of my health journey, because I for a lot of folks that are having issues, I tried, as we'll find out, so many things on my dietary journey till I figured out what works well. And same with my podcasting. You'll notice the first year I was doing a lot of Instagram lives like I did with you with just my iPhone headphones. And then I was like, I got to level up a little bit here and try a new camera, try a new mic. And, you know, I just am happy that you started out doing this as well, because you're doing a fantastic job, as I knew you would. And yeah, man, congrats on everything. Well done.
Yeah. I want to dive into, just to start people out, I want to talk about your path to wellness, or where you thought you were starting this path to wellness. You implemented a vegetarian diet, and it kind of became not just a path to wellness, but really a path of struggle and illness for you.
Yeah. So I'll just ask the listeners to bear with me a little bit. I'm going to go back a bit to some early stages of my life, because it sort of will help paint the picture, Tony. As I mentioned earlier, I was born and raised in the beautiful island of Bermuda. I'm a child of the 70s. By the way, folks, I turned 51 today as we're recording this. It's my birthday.
It is James's birthday. And I was like, you didn't tell me that before you came on.
So I'm super stoked. I feel better now, Tony, than I have in the last 15 to 20 years of my life. I feel fantastic. And saying that, as I was born in 1972, I'm a child of the 70s and 80s. So as you can imagine, and doing the research we've both done now, that's kind of the advent of the standard American diet, high carb, low fat way of eating. You know, you think back to the McGovern and the American guidelines for nutrition and how the fat was vilified. So that happened in my household. My mom was a vegetarian and still continues to be to this day. My dad has always eaten meat, so we ate meat albeit infrequently during my younger years. But you have to understand that there was a lot of, I can't believe it's not butter when it first came out, low fat this, low fat that in the house. And I ended up being quite a chunky youngster. And it wasn't until I went away to boarding school in Canada that I sort of got into fitness. It was just almost a prerequisite because you had to have some sort of sporting activity to be able to graduate. So I got into things like crew and basketball. So I ended up losing weight, getting very fit, especially doing crew. And of course, when you're away at boarding school, you better eat what they give you or you're not eating at all. And what happened was we had a Hungarian chef in our food hall and he was a lot of meat, man. So, which was good. So I ate a lot of meat during that years. Fast forward again, ended up going to university in Canada. And at the time I was dating a young lady who was vegetarian. As I always say, very admirable. And I believe she continues to be a vegetarian to this day. And you have to understand this was the 90s. So there wasn't a ton of stuff out there. And as one does when a guy's living in off campus in a home, you kind of, just to make things easy and keep the peace, you say, all right, well, I'll just try this out, see how it goes. And I ate vegetarian, albeit with eggs for a while. I kept in eggs for quite some time. And then after graduation, this kept on for a period of years. We didn't end up staying together, but sort of that mindset stayed with me. I came back to Bermuda, got into the working world here in insurance. And of course, as most folks do, when you've had a stressful work week, you knock off, you go out for happy hour with the guys, and there was, beers and things involved. And I ended up not eating the healthiest, let's say, albeit still vegetarian, because you can eat what I call trash vegetarian, right, Tony? You can eat trash a lot of diets, but it wasn't whole foods for sure. It was a lot of processed garbage. And I ended up putting back on weight again. And I had a few hospitalizations, my immune system. I ended up collapsing at home one night and crashed onto my forehead and knocked myself unconscious. I was in hospital for a week. Came back that I had chronic Epstein-Barr virus, and ended up meeting my wife. And I was still at that time mostly vegetarian, although being in Bermuda, I incorporated some fish in the diet because, hey, it's Bermuda, we get fresh fish, but never any red meat for sure, which we know is so nutrient dense now. Never any chicken, never any turkey. It was mostly fish. And that was it. I had even stopped eating the eggs for a while. And my wife noticed how I was eating, and we had gone online at the time. This was, let me paint the picture again. This was probably around 2014, 2015. So at that time, there was a ton of pro-plant-based propaganda coming out. So you have to think of Game Changers. You have to think of Cowspiracy, Forks Over Knives. And we happened to come across one of those and watched it. And as anyone knows, it's pretty emotionally driven. And my wife decided, hey, it looks like, especially with Game Changers, I kind of fell for that, admittedly. Hey, look at these guys. They're advocating for this way of eating. They all look super healthy. Why don't we give this a shot? Because it was tied into, we're doing better for the planet. We're doing better for our health. And especially we were doing better for the animals after watching Cowspiracy. And we went into this full steam. I mean, 6 years almost at the end of it there, about 6 years, I did it. And I did not have one cheat. There was nothing. We were very, very strict. My wife ended up even becoming a fully certified plant-based chef. So we were eating very, very well, very clean, whole foods, plant-based. And yet still, and I'll give you a chance to speak in a second, my health began to deteriorate around that 5th year.
So the transformation from vegetarian, and now you were saying you were actually gaining weight, so you weren't feeling good, you were gaining weight. That transition to going vegan, did you start to feel better? Because it seems like you were doing it like to the T.
I sure did. That's a great observation. And I now know and attribute that to removing a lot of the processed stuff. There was a lot of processed stuff in my diet. I had gone through a pretty stressful period in my life prior to meeting my wife. And, just being a guy, was eating a lot of junk, albeit quote unquote vegetarian junk. But you think of processed pastas, microwave meals that are vegetarian, and lots of crackers and cheese, well, not cheese, but Yeah. Well, even cheese for a while, a lot of cheese being vegetarian. I ate a ton of that, but not the good raw cheese that I eat now. It was just, and yeah, I had put on a lot of weight. I was drinking a lot because of all the stress. And when I decided to go whole foods plant-based with her, it was more of a commitment to, yeah, I'm going to get myself healthy. This is going to be it for us. I'm going to do this. And we stuck to it. And I did feel good for a while. And yeah, that was definitely because I removed a lot of the processed stuff.
We hear that a lot. There's that honeymoon phase of either going vegan or even vegetarian, but getting away from eating the things that have a laundry list of ingredients and just basically the crap. Because I can eat French fries every day, and hey, I'm vegetarian. Now you get to this point. It's 5 years down the line. You're vegan. Where do the wheels start to fall off a little bit?
Yeah, I should have noticed a little bit earlier than I did, Tony, but I never would have attributed at that time to my diet what was going on. And I started to have aches and pains that I didn't have before. I attributed it to getting older. You have to remember this was in my 40s at the time. So I was like, yeah, I'm over 40 now. I guess this is what's supposed to happen. I started to get almost carpal tunnel-like syndrome. The main thing that really worried me, though, was I was at my job and I started to begin to forget things. The brain fog was creeping in slowly. And it was this early 2019 where things started to really come off the wheels, to where my aches and pains were getting really bad. I had to put braces on my wrists at work because they were so painful. My hands are almost like this all the time. I was pained all through my body. The brain fog was unrelenting, and I started to drop weight and not be able to maintain weight. So no matter how much I was putting in my mouth, I was just dropping weight like crazy. And we'll talk about how low it got. Then probably one of the worst parts was my bowel habits started to change. I started to notice blood in my stool. I started to get severely constipated, severely, like really challenging. And my Epstein-Barr came back. So that viral infection that I had started to reoccur and started replicating. And I didn't have an immune system to fight it at the end there.
Wow. And so you've noticed these things, and again, you're doubling down on vegan. Did you just pursue more different options of vegan? Like I know some people go to cleanses or things like that. Was your avenue to just double down, or was it I need to find a different path?
Absolutely, Tony. I went and I doubled down on the vegan diet because when I looked on Dr. Google, another mistake I know, this was shown to be the healthiest diet. So I looked for people online and I came across a physician who was extolling the virtues of these prescribed smoothies 3 times a day. She had cured her lupus. So I was going to do this, man. I was going to do it, and I was going to do it hard because this was the way to cure me. But you have to understand, I started to get really nervous. I ended up having to go on disability for my job because I wasn't able to perform the duties that I needed to, meaning my brain fog was so bad. I was in so much pain. I had flown off the island to go get a colonoscopy, and they did their pre-check of my abdomen and stool sample, and then found a severe bacterial infection on top of that, Shigella. So they weren't able to do it. And then the pandemic hit. And then because we're on a small island, our hospital kind of locked down a little bit for elective surgery. So having the colonoscopy was off the table, and it became incumbent on me to figure out my health. I had blood in my stools. I was severely fatigued. No matter how much I put in my mouth, I went down to 127 pounds. I looked like a skeleton. Everyone thought I was dying. I felt like I was dying. My skin was dried out. My nails were cracking. My hair was falling out all over my body, and my teeth ached constantly. And there was not much other that I can do just to lie there. And my wife said to me, you know what? You should try and look at some podcasts and just figure out what's going on. Let me just jump back a second. I'll go back to that doctor. So right around the time that I was feeling very sick, after I had flown away and the pandemic started, I found this doctor online early in 2020. I'm talking about right when I came back after Christmas, sort of that January, February, and it was extolling the virtues of this smoothie cleanse that would heal you. I tried all kinds of supplementation. I was downing a ton of stuff. what I later learned out to be some of the most high oxalate stuff that I could have consumed. I had already been eating high oxalate, but I was really bombing myself at this point. So these smoothies I was whipping up consisted of bags of kale and spinach. I'm talking about a full bag of each. Chia seeds, again, high oxalate. Turmeric, because it's anti-inflammatory. And I'm talking about the root, not the extract, because there is a difference. And almond milk. And I would wear these things up twice a day and chug them down, and it made everything worse. I literally felt like I was dying. It was awful, and it made my constipation worse. And I really hit rock bottom in 2020, in the summer of 2020, and I had to figure a way out, which is when my wife said to me, you should listen to some podcasts, see if you can figure this out.
Yeah, it's just such a struggle. And going through something like that where you're just doing everything possibly that you can to get healthy, and you're going to doctors, you're going to all these different people, and you're in the position where you're taking control of your life, but it's just making it worse. And I can only imagine how you were thinking back then, and the struggle you were going through. Like, it's such a common thing that we start to see with a lot of people now that are going into this plant-based space. Now these podcasts, who do you find? And every person kind of has a different story, but yours is a little different. Who do you find where you start to kind of listen and you're like, this makes a lot of sense?
Well, Tony, as you can imagine, I was searching for anything. Anything helps. Help for brain fog, help for body pain. And something clicked with me as like, why don't I just look up or just search on a whim to see if there's any possible way? Because everything I had read prior, if you recall, had said that the plant-based way of eating was the way to go for long-term health. If there's any way that plants could be bad for you. And I typed in Google something along, can plants cause this discomfort? I think I like carpal tunnel syndrome. And Sally K. Norton, her presentation popped up on YouTube called Lost Seasonality and the Overconsumption of Plants. It's still up on YouTube, and a great watch. And Tony, I kid you not, I watched it, and I must have watched it at least 5-6 times, because in my brain fog state and what I had thought to be the way to perfect health and longevity I was just like, wait a minute, what? Plants can actually harm you. They can make you feel sicker and worse. How is this possible? They have defense chemicals in them too. Wait a minute. And I went back and back and back. And then I was like, oh man, I got to learn more. And that's when I started to binge watch anything with her. So I came across next was Scott Mislinski and the Carnivore cast at the time. He's now the Scott Mize Show. His podcast with Sally Norton. And I listened to him as a carnivore, which you have to understand, still at that time, I was like, there's no way, man, I can't just eat only meat. But at least I would listen to it. And then I started to learn about other people and other physicians who were extolling a low carb, ketogenic, and carnivore way of eating. And then I started to really get into stuff and really hone in on what was going on.
Yeah, I want to go back to the piece on the like game changers and the propaganda and all of that. I mean, you were saying like forks over knives, that was huge. I mean, it was its own industry, and we finding out later that there's so much money involved, like game changers, right? James Cameron, he has a hand in like the Beyond Meat stuff, and he's promoting this wonderful looking, visually exciting documentary, and everybody's doubled down on it, and everybody wants to get healthy, and they see these things. But eating meat only, oh, that is like, you've never heard about that before. And so now we have these grassroots kind of things of these little podcasts, these little YouTube videos, and it's starting to gain traction. Now, who did you see, or what are some doctors you see that were prescribing just the all meat carnivore diet?
Yeah, it's certainly the next one that came along. Before I do that, let me just hop back to the game changers. It's ironic because the gentleman I'm about to mention made a post today, Tony,
Oh yeah.
about all the athletes that were in the Game Changers movie and what their situation is now from then. And without fail, every single one of them is either injured or retired from professional sports. And that was today. So this is ironic. And the person I'm talking about for the listeners is Dr. Sean Baker. So there's a couple of people that I really credit for helping me bring my health back online and literally save my life. Number one, as I always say, is Sally Norton. If I hadn't have found her, I highly doubt I would be here today talking to you, Tony. In fact, I know I wouldn't, at least not in this form, not in this healthy form that I am now. Would I still be around? I don't know, but I don't think I would. I was really, really in a bad way. The second person is Dr. Sean Baker, because when I listened to him and his Joe Rogan, that's what I found the Joe Rogan podcast with him, as so many people have. And I listened to him, and I listened to a physician talking about this way of eating, who also happened to be a military man, a nuclear launch code weapons specialist. So they don't just let anybody do this. It just caused me to stop a minute and think about everything. And as you know, when your eyes start to open up and the brain fog begins to lift, and we'll talk about what happened when I made that switch from vegan into carnivore, because there was definitely some stages, but your eyes get open to things and you just want to figure out, how many other things have I been lied to in my life about what we're eating?
Yeah, just bringing the veil down on what's real and what's not. We were talking before this podcast. I was talking about Bill Schindler, Dr. Bill Schindler, and we were talking. And when he came on, he just was talking about, we've eaten like this for millions of years, right? It's just all of a sudden in the past, few hundred years, we started messing around with food, and look where we're at. We're sicker than we've ever been. And this goes to the fact that we got to get back to the basics and get back to the way that we used to eat. It'll never be the same, but we got to get close to it, and we have to make this change. So now you've seen, Sean Baker, Sally Norton, Ken Berry, all these people talk about it. You're ready to dive in to carnivore. What's the process or the step-by-step that you take? Because I know, and if maybe you can talk about a little of this, of the oxalate dumping, that some people, they go into carnivore too fast and they have actually kind of a negative reaction to that. And then they stop. They're like, okay, this is wrong. But can you talk about, your process and how you slowly trickled in?
Sure. And it's a great one, Tony. And thanks for asking that question, because so many folks do run into this issue. And folks, I encourage you to definitely follow Sally K. Norton online. Read her book, Toxic Superfoods. It is the encyclopedia of all things oxalate, and just a fantastic read. And she just lays it all out there for you as a reader. But from my experience and God works in mysterious ways, Tony, because if I hadn't have found Sally Norton first and I had gone full bore, which I ended up still doing because I'm a stubborn man, into that without having that, I could have made things very much worse for myself. And we'll talk about how it did get kind of bad for a while there. So what I did early on was I started to embrace the ketogenic low oxalate way of eating. One of my first things was adding, obviously, meat back in after having none, literally none, for 6 years. And it was a mind-bending experience for a while, because, I was like, how can I do this? Am I going to do this? And I ended up choosing fish for myself, salmon. And I'll never forget that day when I was like, I don't want to feel like this anymore. James, you've got to do it. You got to do it. The cognitive dissonance was there. I just put it in my mouth and ended up eating the whole thing. I kid you not. A few hours to the next day later, I literally felt the glimmer of hope, and I knew I was on the right track just by that simple addition. Like, you often hear the ex-vegans talking about their brain turns on, and it is true, especially when you've been starved for fats and animal fats, especially, for a long time. And so in terms of, I kept the vegetables in for a while, because I knew from Sally to lower my oxalate down to the low oxalate stuff, things like bok choy, berries, and coconut is a low oxalate sort of nut, if you will, because the rest of them are all very high oxalates, which again, I had been bombing my gut with for years and years: peanut butter, almonds, cashews. And I did that for a while, and I definitely felt better. But as I began, as you can imagine, listening to more and more podcasts and realizing that people were healing themselves, especially from the gut issues I was having, because the gut issues were still there. My gut was shredded from so many years of that. I thought about adding more animal foods and then removing more vegetables off my plate, because I was so angry that I had been duped. And so just disillusioned with the idea of vegetables that it actually became harder for me, Tony, if you can believe it, to remove the vegetables that rather than adding animal foods back in. It seems crazy. It seems like it should be the reverse. My wife's is from Venezuela, so her mother's Venezuelan, and so they eat a lot of organ meats down there, and her mom convinced me to add organ meat. So I was one of the rare vegans that added organ meats in early. In fact, after the salmon, the next thing I added in was liver and kidney, and I just went for it. And it did me so well because I had been so fatigued and bedridden for so long. And just having that nutrition, I mean, we know how power packed nutritionally liver is. It gave me some energy back and gave me I felt like I was starting to live again. But as I moved on, yes, I was like, you know what? I'm feeling better. Damn these vegetables. I'm going to start to eliminate them all. And I did. And I went full carnivore. And I'll let you ask any questions. So I'll pause there for a second.
No, yeah. So you're going, and it's a back then, you're talking. So what is this? 2020, 2021?
So end of 2020, beginning of 2021 is when I really decided to eliminate all the, yeah, that's exactly it. So end of 2020, beginning of 2021 is when I started to eliminate all the vegetables and go full carnivore.
Yeah. And I feel like it now, a few years go by, and today we hear this animal-based, carnivore, all these things, ketovore. Now we hear all these new things, but back then, so 2 years ago, it's still pretty new. So now you start to feel really good. Mm-hmm. You've eliminated all of the vegetables. So what are the health benefits you start? Yes, you're feeling good, but physically, what else is happening where you're like, there is something to this diet?
Yeah. So let me preface this by saying that, as with most folks, there is a honeymoon period followed by a sort of keto flu where your body adapts to burning fat as fuel rather than using carbohydrates. And if you can imagine, I had been eating some of the most high carb stuff for years. So my body hadn't had any fat whatsoever, especially being a vegan. So I ran into a couple of problems after a few months. But for those first honeymoon period months, when I was just starting strict carnivore, man, I felt incredible because my body had been so nutritionally starved, not only because I was eating plant-based vegan for so long and not having the good animal stuff that we know can only be found in animal foods, but also I had been eating the highest oxalate foods there are on the vegan diet, things like beets, beet tops. I mentioned all the nuts, cashews, almonds, peanut butter. Oh my goodness, chia seeds, turmeric, spices like pepper, cinnamon, which I threw in everything as a dessert. You just name it, I was eating it. And so what that was doing was literally, what happens with oxalates is they end up accumulating in your body. So the body, because they're like little glass shards, your body stores them. They recognize them as something that shouldn't be in there because plants are using them as defenses so they don't get eaten by us or other predators. And they also are used by plants to sequester minerals out of the soil when they're planted. So the plants use the oxalate crystals to help draw up minerals into the plant. So what happens when you eat a ton of oxalate foods and it goes into your body? You get minerally depleted. So things like calcium, magnesium, potassium all get bound up in these oxalate crystals in your body, and you're wondering why you're getting calf cramps and not sleeping well and aches and pains everywhere. It's because you're accumulating this stuff, and it takes, literally, learning from Sally, years to get them out. And you have to go, and I'm going to get into it now, how to do it very slowly. But me being the, stubborn male that I am, I hit the pedal to the metal because those first couple of months, man, I felt great. So you asked the question, sorry, that was a bit of a long-winded way to get to the answer I'm going to give you here. I started to notice things like my energy came back. My mental clarity was getting better. I felt more like me. I wasn't just laying in bed all day wishing that I would die. Literally, there was color coming back in my face. I hadn't yet begun to put on a ton of weight, but I had begun to put on a little bit of muscle after the first 3 months. And that's hardly doing any, you have to understand, at this time, I was literally using stretch bands to exercise because that's all I could muster. But so I was like, yep, this is the way. This is going to be the way for me, because I knew from where I had felt to almost near death, I felt like it, to just a few months of eating carnivore, I felt like, yep, I'm onto something here.
And now you're going strict carnivore. You know, you're like, you said it, like, I'm stubborn. I'm going to just do the all meat, and this is the way I'm going to do it. And I want to talk about implementing some different things. One of the things in particular is like raw dairy. And I know that can be very helpful for people, especially if they're coming from this high oxalate diet. Did raw dairy help you?
Well, let me preface that by saying, Tony, I do not, and still don't at that time, have access to raw dairy, except for raw cheese. However, I believe that, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, especially when you're sick. We know that. That's a saying for sure in the carnivore space. And for those folks that are out there, and we're going to get into, the type of things that I eat, I'm sure later on, is that, not everyone can afford ribeyes. And I did not have access to raw dairy, even though I only really got to try fresh raw A2 dairy recently on a trip I had this summer for the first time. Really, because it's illegal here in Bermuda, as it is in a lot of states in the United States too. So I slowly tried to implement things like kefir and raw cheese. But folks have to understand, I was struggling early on. So I would get reactions from dairy big time. And I would even get reactions from red meat. But slowly I would begin to incorporate these foods and just tell my body, this is nutrition for you. This is going to help you. And I went along this very gingerly. And it wasn't until later on that I realized the benefit of dairy, and until I healed my gut from the years of bombing it with oxalates that I had done. So particularly helpful for me early on were things like kefir, which I still use to this day, fermented dairy, super, super helpful for me. I also used colostrum powder early on too, rather than having access to fresh colostrum here. I got some supplementational form. And we can get into my thoughts on supplementation as well. And I just want folks to understand that after going gung-ho, about 3 months in, Tony, I started to feel bad again. So the aches and pains started to come back. The brain fog was creeping in again. And I was going, what is happening? My little honeymoon period of feeling like I was in my 20s again is disappearing. Is this failing me now? And I'll let you speak now too.
Yeah, we get into now. You talk about don't let perfect get in the way of progress, right? It doesn't have to be this specific way. We see this divide in people who are carnivore, and it's just that now there's all these groups. It was just carnivore and vegan, and now you have like, oh no, animal based, which I could have fruit, but no vegetables. And there's like, oh, I'm ketovore, I can have some vegetables. And there's all these different sections. I think we both are kind of on this idea that it's okay to have other things outside of red meat and outside of carnivore, and everybody's going to have their different view, and respect everybody's view, because I have this not new, but I coined it to myself and clients. It's like a primal aligned diet, which means I'm going to have good animal protein, animal fat, because that's what my body needs. And if I have carbohydrates, they're going to be few and far between, but I'm going to allow myself some wiggle room. And if you're super, super strict, you're not going to stay with it. And it seems that a lot of people that feel, for example, I had fruit yesterday at lunchtime, and they had melon. And I was like, I'm going to have a piece of fruit. And this one person comes up to me, they're like, you can have that? My coworker, because they know I just eat all the meats, right? I go, yeah, I could have it. I go, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you're carnivore. I thought you can't. I said, I can have whatever I want. It doesn't have to be dogmatic. Do you feel like when you're going into carnivore that you have to be this way only, or else you're out of the club kind of deal?
Tony, I love that you bring this up. This is super important, and super important on my journey and so many others. I left let's call it an ideology behind when I stopped being a vegan. I also left a very dogmatic way of thinking, to the point where we see what happens to certain folks on the vegan diet that end up attacking others like pretty badly, not only sometimes physically, but also verbally online, berating people for their dietary choices. Now knowing what I know, and I'll tie this into what happened to me after I started feeling worse on the carnivore diet. You and I are very similar. We are all about whatever it takes to make you feel good and optimal. And I firmly plant my flag, as I always say, in a low oxalate, high protein, good animal protein sourced with fats as well, that diet. And the reason why I say low oxalate is because I learned, again, God bless Sally, because when I started to feel worse on the carnivore diet, I messaged Sally and I was like, she replied to me, God bless her, on Instagram message. I was like, Sally, what's happening? I'm feeling terrible. And she's like, well, what did you do? I said, I'm full carnivore, been that way for about 3 months. She goes, do you have any oxalates in your diet now? I'm like, no, zero. And she goes, oh, whoa, slow down there, cowboy. You could really do yourself damage, because people need to understand that oxalate, when it's in your body, is stored in various injury spots, especially. For some reason, all the research has shown it gets stored in injury spots that you've had over the years. And also the thyroid is a big location for oxalates to love to hang out after you ingest them. Once you stop eating them cold turkey, your body goes, hallelujah, let's work on now getting rid of these things, and you can start dumping. So think of, all of a sudden, all over the years of all that high oxalate food that I was consuming, start to go, yay, let's start to move this stuff out. So the aches and pains come back. The oxalate is in your bloodstream. The body's doing its best to heal, get it out. And then you have kidney pain, because think of calcium oxalate crystals and kidney stones. These are what kidney stones are made of. They're made of oxalate. And it's a very dangerous way to start feeling very bad again very quickly. So what Sally recommends is, and other folks like Monique Addinger, is tapering down very slowly over the years, especially if you come from a high oxalate vegan background, and just making sure that you have some in your diet. So when I first started back adding things, I was like, okay, I'll do this. I ended up adding local bananas. Being from Bermuda at the time when I added it back, I was eating bananas and fruit, because I still swear down, Tony, I don't want to eat any more vegetables. I ate enough of those blended up, and I was like, all right, I'm going to add some low oxalate fruit back in my diet. And do you know what? God bless her, Sally. It helped tremendously for me, because remember, the oxalates are coming out. You want to slow down the dumping process, but also as they're coming out, they're binding up a lot of minerals in your body when they're coming out. So at least you're getting some carbs back in. You're getting some stuff back in with the bananas. There was a little bit of fiber in there to help bind up in your stool to get the stuff out. Dairy is also another one that you hit on, Tony, is that because of the high calcium amount in dairy, that's when I really started to add in and really kind of tell my body, okay, we're going to be adding more dairy. The cheese came back because dairy binds up the oxalates in your stool as it moves out. So you're getting the calcium from the dairy, and it also helps to bind it up as it goes through your body. But yeah, super, super important. And as just to tie that back into what we were talking about, as Scott Mislinski often says, and you and I often says, this is not a black and white diet, or shouldn't be. There's gray in carnivore. You can, and we don't have a license on this. I mean, there's people come from different dietary backgrounds, different health challenges that they're dealing with. So whatever works for you, I encourage folks to at least experiment and try for yourself and see what works. And I clearly did.
Yeah. And that's why I was asking the question about, you know, if it's not carnivore, is it right? Am I doing the right things? And you look back at your experiences of vegan, and you were even a doctor told you, oh, do these smoothies, it's going to be better. The more plants you have, the better it's going to be. And you just kept on that path with that ideology that, more is more is better. And it didn't work for you. But now, learning from that experience, you're going through carnivore, you have these great, you feel really good. And then you have this transition period of, I don't feel good. But instead of pushing through because carnivore is the way, and I'm a carnivore, I'm the carnivorist, right? I have to do it this way. You're like, no, I need to, like you said, everybody's different. We're all come from different backgrounds. It's okay to veer off of this because that's what you need. And people need to realize that. And it's not this ideology or dogma of black and white. Like you said, everybody is different, and we all have to get on the same page of just eating really good food, whatever, how that looks for you, but find what works for your well-being and your health and your longevity. And if you can do that, and I don't care if you wave the carnivore flag or not, it's about you and your life and your longevity. And that's the most important. And I applaud you for just it's just such a hard thing your transition of going from where you were to where you are now. That's a struggle. That's really hard. And it takes a lot of guts to go through that, because a lot of people just give up. They give up, and you didn't. And it shows your strength. And I just
Thanks, man.
applaud you for it.
Thanks, man.
And
I appreciate it.
yeah, of course. And that's one thing the next piece I want to talk about. You're feeling good. You've made these changes. You've incorporated, cheeses or some type of a carbohydrate in there. Now you start to level out a little bit. You're feeling great. I want to talk about your strength and your strength training, because at one point I heard the story, and if you want to share, you can, where you were going on a moped or something, and it was just like you fell off the moped.
Oh, Tony. Yeah, it's that was one of my lowest points, because people need to understand, listeners need to understand, riding around in Bermuda, we get around on mopeds. It's a small island. It's just a quick and convenient way. And you grow up, instead of getting a car in Bermuda at 16, you get your first moped and your license. So I have been always riding a moped for years. You can imagine they're not the heaviest of vehicles or things. And at my sickest, I, was still adamant that I had the strength to do it. But one day I went outside and took the moped off the stand, and it fell on top of me. And I didn't have the strength to get it off of me. And it just was a really surreal moment for me. I get emotional talking about it, because it brings me right back to that moment of having this bike on top of me and having to ask for help to get it off of me, where I was physically, where I was mentally, so low. And I wanted to go for a ride to make myself feel better. And that's what happened. And it was at that moment I was like, something's got to change. So that's a good backtrack. But leading into what I decided to implement after I started to feel better was that I was really, really weak, really fatigued. And as I started to get that energy back, which I talked about from eating some of the organ meats and the good animal fats, I wanted to get strong again. I needed to get strong again. I had been sick and tired of being sick and tired. And I started very slowly. I started with exercise bands, and that's all I could muster, and stretching. So I would literally have these exercise bands out in the morning and do this. And it was all I could muster. And I just worked out in my bedroom, because again, the pandemic was sort of still on. And I was like, okay, I just need to get stronger. Now, the difference was this time having the nutrition with the small amount of exercise was a multiplier for me. Whereas before I was trying to exercise and not giving myself the nutrition, and I was getting nowhere. It was like a hamster wheel. I was actually going in reverse at times. And I got sicker at the end. For the many, many months, I couldn't exercise at all because I was just too weak. But slowly but surely, I began to add weights, very small, 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 15 pounds. And one of the first things I did, which I often talk about, was I started going for weighted walks. And I found those tremendously helpful. I just talked to you offline before we started. I went for my weighted walk this morning. It was something for me that was transformational, because, and I tell folks that when you get your weighted vest and you put it on and you go for the walk, yeah, it's physically challenging, especially in Bermuda where there's a lot of hills. But I was also mentally playing a game on my body, making my brain feel like I was putting on more weight, even though it was going to take some time, I knew. So I was getting my body prepared to get muscle back on. So I was adding this weight, and it was great exercise. And all I did was walk. I didn't run. I was walking with 25, 30 pounds on my back. And you have to imagine at that time being probably around 140, 150 pounds. That was quite an exertion for me. And it's still tough up and down these hills, but man, I said to someone the other day, they said, looking back, what are you most proud of? And I just said, the strength I had to, as you just highlighted, to get through this mentally and to get through this physically, and where I am today compared to a few short years ago, man, it's just a testament to when you start to eat the right things, when you start to live life in a clean way, get movement in, and start to really look at how you're living, that the sky's the limit, man. Like I said, I'm 51. I feel better than I have in 20 years. No word of a lie. I feel amazing. Amazing.
I've seen, you do the weighted walks on your Instagram. You'll show that
Yeah.
like all the time. We're doing weighted walks. And then you tagged or you pinned like at the top of your Instagram from you like four years ago or whatever, a picture. And you look jacked, man. You look really good. Like you look freaking huge. And you could just see the color, right? The color in your skin. And you're in Bermuda, so you're tan, you're lucky. And but you could just see the muscle mass that has been put on you. And I always talk about strength, and that's one thing. Nutrition, yes, I'm passionate about, but strength and strength training. We talk about strength has a greater purpose in life, and being able to be strong, you are breeding this confidence in yourself, and you also, nothing is harder in life if you're stronger. Nothing is that much harder in life if you are strong, and being able to physically do things that life demands. Like you're saying, you're in your 50s now and you feel better than ever. You go back 20 years ago, somebody in their 50s, that's it. They're on their way down. You're going up. You're aging like a fine wine, as I like to say.
Thanks, Tony. And I like to take this moment. I mean, we've been giving each other compliments here, which is fantastic. I want to thank you, man, for what you put out there. It was one of the reasons I had you on the podcast with me early on, was because of your stuff that you're putting out, especially being an instructor, all your kettlebell stuff that you put out there. It was really inspirational to me, and why I said, I've got to get this guy on the podcast, because he is just helping so many people. And, and kudos to you too, man. I mean, you're a powerhouse. Watching you do the Turkish get-ups with those kettlebells, dude, I am envious, because still my weakest part for me happens to be my legs. And what I'll say, Tony, is, before I let you speak again, is that you're absolutely right, man. People have to understand that when, at those sort of last year or two of being a vegan, when my health went off a cliff, I was mentally unwell as well as being physically unwell. My libido had gone off a cliff. I'm man enough to tell folks, and this is what happens. We know that good fats and our cholesterol are the building blocks of hormones in the body, and I did not have nearly enough. My self-confidence was going in the toilet because I was so skinny. People would ask me if I was dying, if I had cancer. And I was thinking to myself, no, I think I look pretty good. But then, like you say, you look back at the pictures of me, I'm like, damn, I did look like I was dying. And when I was laying in bed there and going, how could I have been so wrong? It wasn't until I started to exercise again, get that confidence, get the hormones going through the diet, but mostly through the exercise. And we know, especially after age 50 for us adults, that sarcopenia is a real thing, muscle wastage as you get elderly. And I watched Dr. Baker, who is the guru, and that dude at 57 almost now is crushing it. And I want to be as good as he is. Will never be that way, but just look up to him so much, in yourself, just in how important that muscle building is at any age. And the proof that I've done that after being vegan and after now being 50 plus, I want to just show folks that yes, it is possible. I don't take any steroids, although I've been accused of it now. That's the only way I possibly could have come from being a vegan and looking so ill to this now. No, but it's hard work, isn't it, Tony? It is hard work, man. I work out, and just so I will get into the details. I work out 6 days a week. I take one day off where I don't do anything. And currently I'm doing full body workouts most days. I usually get my leg workout in through my weighted walks. And by exercise, I like to say I hit my little home gym 3 to 4 days a week. And then the other 2 days or 3 days transversely, I do the weighted walk. And so I'm getting the weighted walk and then I'm hitting the weights. And when I do the weights, it's mostly full body exercises that I do. As I get further along, in my journey, I'm going to switch it up to more of the, chest tries, back buys, and then leg day one day. But I plan on joining a gym full time again next year. That's another goal of mine. I'm actually studying to become a personal trainer in the background, so you guys know. And and again, thanks to you, man, because such an inspiration, Tony.
Yeah, and again, you're doing all the work, man. You're putting the work in, and you're accomplishing these things to be as healthy and as fit as you possibly can. And we can do this work by ourselves, but I also want to talk about your wife too. And as much as it is upon ourselves to make ourselves better, she was very inspirational through this whole process. So what was, I know, because you were saying, because Gabby wanted to be, I mean, she was a chef, a vegan chef, and you're doing all these things together, and you have to take these twists and turns because it's not really working out. Where was she a part of the success that you have now?
Oh, full credit to her. Full credit, because as I mentioned, she was the one that asked me to, or suggested to me, that I should start listening to podcasts, which got me on my own health journey. Mm-hmm. Then she was obviously very supportive, albeit that she had remained vegan longer than me. She didn't have as many of the health challenges. However, I'll get to it in a second. She ended up pivoting not only her business, because she had a plant-based business. Out of that plant-based business, once she saw the changes in me, she was like, damn, you're like a completely new human being next to me. I'm like, yeah, because she saw me at my lowest, when I was at my sickest, depressed, anxious, scared, sick, and just dying, to thriving, muscle bound, back to a better version of myself even than prior to us meeting. And so she ended up actually coming on board with the carnivore way of eating, and you should see her now, man, like super jacked and working out and exercising and looking fabulous. So it's not just for men, for women too. This is a huge thing. And looking back, she's like, yeah, I feel so much better now. I didn't realize now, my menstrual cycle is regulated. I'm putting on muscle more easily. My hair is growing like never before. So yeah, full credit to her.
You guys are like a power couple now.
You got it.
So I want to talk about you've got this success, you feel great, you're strong, metabolically healthy. What's your regimen for your day to day? Like, what do you eat? And I want to talk about, we're going to get to the air fryer, because I have stories about the air fryer now. That was what we last left off when I was on your podcast. I want to talk about that. But what do you eat on the day to day?
Yeah, great question, Tony. And folks should understand, like anything, like everything, it's changed over my time as a carnivore. I've experimented with stuff. I'm adding stuff in, taking stuff out. But currently, every day, I start off, again, thanks to Sally Norton, my day usually just before 5 a.m. I wake up and I have hot water with lemon and Celtic sea salt. It's a great way to rehydrate the body. And actually, the lemon juice helps to break down any oxalate that has been, your body cleans itself at night. We know about the lymphatic system, and when we sleep is when our body goes into housekeeping mode. So if you get that in, you hydrate yourself with a little bit of lemon, start that out. Then about an hour later, I eat breakfast. I'm a firm believer right now in breakfast, because my goal, folks have to remember, is putting on weight. I do believe fasting is a great tool, but it's just that, a tool. Not everyone needs to fast immediately. I clearly came from a malnourished background, so my goal now is to get food in me, and especially with the amount of exercise I'm doing lately, is to maintain and build my muscle mass and get my weight up. So I start the day now with a couple of eggs, usually about 3 eggs, various forms, whatever I cook that day. Has been a lot of just in the pan and sunny side up eggs. 2 90-10, or usually 90-10 ground beef patties with ghee on top, and then some slices of raw cheese, and then a cup of kefir first thing in the morning, which is a great way to start the day. I still am incorporating coffee in. Oh, man, I'm embarrassed to say this. I got way down last year and I thought I was going to be able to eliminate it. Then I went on my 50th birthday trip to Alaska and coffee came right back in because I was so jet lagged and I haven't left it. But this month, again, I'm starting the wean down process to see how I do, because I want to do, Tony, at least a couple of months or a month or two without the coffee in there. But I still use coffee. I put some protein powder in there. I use Equip Foods. It's no secret, and it's unflavored. And then I usually exercise in the mornings. I find that's when I'm best. I get my exercise in early in the morning, probably about another hour and an hour and a half after eating. I let the food settle and then I get right in the gym, whether it's my walk in the mornings or it's the home gym. Then I do have a small lunch, which is some more patties for lunch with ghee on top. And then for dinner is where I kind of get a little, fancy and fire up the barbecue outside and have my steak and then something in the air fryer. I'm eating a lot of smoked salmon lately. I had been eating, Tony, a lot of chicken on my intro into carnivore and for the last couple of years, but as most carnivores do, I'm finding that I'm just craving the red meat. So I'm just eating a ton of steaks these days. And again, it doesn't have to be expensive. I bought not only the air fryer, but I also bought an Instant Pot where I pressure cook chuck roasts and whatever other roasts I can put in there that will feed for a couple of days after doing a nice roast. And then I just buy inexpensive steaks like chuck steaks or strip loins, which tend to be less expensive than ribeyes. What I have found during this journey for me is that my body cannot handle a ton of fat at once because my gallbladder is compromised from the vegan diet. Thank you again, vegan diet. Because I wasn't eating fat for so many years, it kind of got very sluggish. I formed 2 cysts in there. Could be oxalates, who knows? But I have to be very careful with my fat intake. I can do a lot more than I started out with. And again, I started having to supplement, and we can talk about that later, with various things to help me as I transitioned in. But now I just keep my fat in a certain window. And yeah. And then I finish my day with usually some yogurt or some sort of heavy whipping cream or something like that, and my fruit. So usually blueberries and or banana on rare occasion these days, mostly blueberries every day. And that's what I eat. And I give myself a fasting window of 12 hours until my next mealtime.
Yeah, I mean, I want to eat like you. That sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And going back to your point about the fasting, I like OMAD, and I don't do it all the time of the one meal a day. I enjoyed it for the convenience piece because I'm only eating one meal. I feel satisfied. But for me, I've been heavier, so I'm trying to go the other way. And fasting for me works more, and it makes me feel a little bit better. But for you, and that's, everybody hears these intermittent fasting. Oh, you want to get healthy, intermittent fasting. Well, that's sometimes not the best or ideal for an individual. Sometimes for women, especially, extended periods of fast are probably not the best idea. But I think fasting is good. But like you said, for you, for right now, it's not about the weight loss, it's about the weight gain. So you're talking about putting in more protein, more good animal fats. And also on the topic of animal fats, I feel everybody who does carnivore or an animal-based diet has a fat window, right? There's this little bit of a window where if you go too much, it's not very good. You're going to go in the bathroom a lot. And I've been doing it for 3 years now, and I've still am messing around with my fats, and it takes time. And it seems like you're kind of dialed in now. And there's been times where I push the fat up a little bit and I feel really, really good. And if I go too much, I don't feel as good. Or if I go too low, I don't feel as good. So it seems like you're starting to really fine tune the diet. And it seems like even though those options will change, they stay pretty much kind of the same most of the week?
Yeah, and let's talk about that fat thing really quickly, Tony. Is that I have to let folks know early on. You just heard me talk about that. I've always known I've had gallbladder issues. I had them when I was very sick the last couple of years as a vegan. That's when they did an ultrasound on my gallbladder, saw that it had sludge in there, which is because it didn't have to work very hard. I also had 2 cysts in there. So I have to be very careful. And of course, when you go into the carnivore way of eating, you hear all about the fat, get the fat, and which fat is super important. I agree. But I also, not only to having a sluggish gallbladder, I also had compromised pancreas because I was definitely struggling with insulin sensitivity from eating high carb for so long. But also my stomach acid, which happens on the vegan diet as well, was so low, man. I had to get it back up. So I supplemented with betaine HCl for almost 1.5 to 2 years to get my stomach acid back up. And what you do is you take a high volume and then slowly taper down to get your stomach producing its own acid again. And that was what really helped me. And I also took a digestive enzyme too to help with the pancreatic insufficiency. So I took a high lipase one to help with the fat digestion. And it was a game changer because up until then I was constantly having loose stools and I was going, what the heck is going on here? And I realized, I need some help there. I need some help to break down the lipase so my body can actually absorb it. My stool started to regulate. Then I start to put on weight a little easier because you're absorbing all the nutrients out of your food. You remember the famous saying, you aren't what you eat, you are what you absorb. So that gut health and breaking down the food into things that our body can use is super important. And so yeah, the fat thing is super important. I apologize, Tony. What was the second part to that question when I dive back into the fat thing there?
I don't really remember, James. I
Oh, I know what it was. It was,
okay.
has the diet changed at all? That's what I wanted to
Oh
talk
yeah. Okay.
about. Yeah, that's what I want to talk about. Yes, pretty much for myself, it stays the same. Like I'm in terms of what I eat, people go, man, that sounds pretty boring. No, it never gets old, does it, Tony? A steak never gets old. I'm never tired. As Dr. Chafee says, it's my birthday every day, even though it is today and I'm going out to eat a steak, but it feels like it every day. Um, I also had trouble with eggs early on. I heard all about the benefits of eggs and choline and getting the good yolks in. And I struggled with histamine intolerance because my body was still a side effect of oxalates, and oxalate toxicity is having histamine reactions to food, and eggs were causing me reactions. So I did them a lot in the beginning. I felt okay, but I knew something was off. I eliminated them for probably 6 to 8 months, allowed my body time to heal, then added them back in slowly. And now I have no issues. Same thing I did with milk. And, you know, I started off with goat's milk. I told you I had reactions with them. I took a break and then slowly shot glass by shot glass, just introducing it. Now I can chug as much as I want. In fact, yes, you know, dairy can be quite addictive sometimes, so I have to watch it. But yes, I've certainly dialed it in now to where I know there's days where, yeah, I probably ate a little bit too much fat there today, and I can tell the next day without going into gory detail. I know exactly where I need to be. And some folks are like, man, I can't understand how you eat that lean ground beef, but you know what? It works for me. It works, and it's just been revolutionary for my health.
Yeah, I actually, on the point of ground beef, I do. Everybody tries to get like, oh, get the fattest ground beef. I'm like, I really do 85-15. I felt that I like a lot. And not even 80-20. I like 85-15. And I do actually probably more ground beef than I ever have. Uh, the yogurt and fruit at night or closer to the bedtime, is that purposeful because it's closer to the bedtime? It's helping with sleep, or is that just like I kind of want a dessert?
Well, it kind of, pardon the expression, but kills two birds with one stone, Tony. So it's absolutely right. It's like I want something after having that delicious steak. You know, you're like, oh, well, I got it. I'm not, literally, it's not a lot. I have a little, I'll hold up my hand. It's about a cup full here. And I put some blueberries in there with the yogurt or heavy whipping cream, you know, just a little bit. But it serves a couple of purposes. I was, as most folks do as well, and you've heard Dr. Saladino talk about it, which is why he went back and added carbohydrates in, is I suffered a lot with muscle cramping during my keto flu stage of the carnivore transition. And because I was so oxalate toxic and the oxalate started coming back out there, binding up a lot of my minerals, I ended up adding minerals back in. LMNT specifically was very helpful for me. They're raw and flavored. I added that back in my early stages. But again, talking to Sally, it was like, get that in, that carb. If you're going to have some carb source in the evening before you go to bed, so you don't wake up in the middle of the night with a severe calf cramp, you've got a little carbohydrates in there, kind of gets that, you know, regulated for you. And it serves a couple of purposes. So yeah, there is a method to that madness, having it as in my last bite for the day.
Yeah, I like that. And the point of the LMNT, how many milligrams of sodium do you take in, or what do you feel is really optimal for you?
Do you know the honest truth is, Tony? I have no clue. I salt my food to taste, and I wish I get that question asked a lot. I also get the question is, how much protein do you? I have no idea. I eat what I know. I'm going intuitively with everything. I know when my body doesn't want any more salt, so I don't add it. And I also know when my body's craving salt. Because this is a little trick I do. I take, when I have my big salt thing and I'm salting up my meat, I take a little, put on my finger, lick it. And if I go, oh yeah, that's good. Or if I go, man, it's not tasting so good today, I ease up on the salt, or I go a little bit heavier. And I salt my food liberally. I'm not afraid of salt. And I put salt in my ground beef to make my patties because they come obviously unsalted just with the ground beef. And as far as the protein goes, I can only imagine I'm well above the requirement now, especially when I add the protein powder in my coffee, the Equip, which is 24 grams per serving per scoop, which is a good, plus all the meat that you heard that I'm getting in there. So people recommend obviously a gram to a gram and a half per pound of body weight. I would imagine I'm on the higher end of that spectrum now. But again, folks have to understand, as you so eloquently put it earlier, my goal is to continue to be adding weight. I know it sounds like an envious position to be in, but unless you've been on that side of the spectrum where you're so thin, people are looking at you like you should be dead or blown over with a stiff breeze. It's I'm so thankful that my body is taking on, and as you said, putting on the muscle mass at this age. And I have put on now, I calculated the other day, probably about 55 pounds, Tony, of probably muscle since I was
Whoa,
at my lowest. 55 pounds.
that's a lot.
Yeah, dude.
That's awesome. That's people got to realize like that's really hard to do. That's
Yeah.
phenomenal.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I started at 127. I'm up near, let's see now, over 180. That's for sure.
My man. All right, James. Uh, and you said this too, and I think this is a big part of the confusion of diets and diet culture now. And I hate to say diets a lot, and we just use that term because people understand it. That we have to be intuitive, like kind of how you're saying. Just because, oh, my diet plan says I need to hit this, I have to hit this, and this is the number, and this is, I'm going to be super regimented. And we look at food as numbers versus what is the purpose of food. Purpose is to get nutrients, to make us strong, to help our brains. Like we are looking at food all the wrong way. We need to look at it as this is the fuel for my body so I can go do things in life versus I need to check off the list and have this grocery shopping thing. And then I have to make sure I'm in this calorie deficit because I want to look good. Like, whoa, we're getting off the wrong path here. And there's this target you're never going to hit. It's always moving. Just like focus on eating good food, fueling your body, and not being so concerned with am I hitting my protein number for the day. Like let's eat till you're satisfied, you meet the satiety, and you feel good. If you have to make tweaks along the way, like you're saying, yeah, you've made tweaks, we've all have changed things up around based on how we're feeling. That's more powerful and impactful than somebody getting a plan and just reading a bunch of numbers, in my opinion.
100%, Tony. And the great thing about the carnivore diet is the simplicity of it. Why are we trying to make things more complicated than they need to be? Folks have to understand that when I was a vegan and I began to feel sick, I was like, right, I've read about how I'm going to be missing B12. I read about how I'm going to be missing other nutrients like, preformed vitamin A and God, let's talk about carnitine, carnosine, anserine, taurine, all those things, which I found out much later. But at least I knew that I had to supplement. I got a multivitamin, I got B12. I was getting all the vegan forms of these things, which were no good. I ended up with a supplement graveyard at the end of that. When I was trying to figure out my health, I did all kinds of cleanses with pills and, all kinds of parasite cleanses and this cleanses and that cleanse. And I ended up wasting so much money. I got taken for so much money, Tony. And it only took the simplicity of changing what I put in my mouth and getting some movement in to revolutionize my health for me. And I understand folks that come from that background that want to know everything and just tick the boxes of where they are. But if you're mentally fatigued and you're brain fogged and you just want to change your outlook and your physical well-being, just as you said, eat intuitively. This is the way as Dr. Bill Schindler talks about it, evolved as humans. They weren't tracking macros and looking at micronutrient status back in the day or how much sodium they ate. They were just trying to find food and eat it and feel good and live. And that's what I've been doing, man. I often get the question too, as well, how much water do you drink during the day? I was like, I don't know. I just drink when I'm thirsty and drink a lot, I guess, but I really don't know. And I'm not saying what those folks do is wrong, but just for me, that is what I found works best for me, is just to go with what my body is telling me, because doing this diet has put me so much more in tune with my body, so much more. Like I told you, when I figured out that eggs were causing me a problem, it's because you're narrowing down the scope of what you're putting in your body, so you can tell pretty quickly what's causing you issues, can't you?
Yeah, just that so many people go on this elimination diet and then they start to incorporate a few things like, oh, that's the one, that's it, I can't eat this anymore. My sister's kind of going through the same thing right now. She saw an ad. Oh, this is the great, you're gonna love this story. She saw an ad. I've been telling her, I mean, she's been following me, she knows I do carnivore and all these things. And apparently she went to the allergist, and the allergist, she was just having some of these issues. And the allergist was like, you know what? You should really limit carbohydrates. You need to have animal protein. You need to have fats in your diet. You're not getting enough of that. And get off the junk, blah, 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 all this stuff. All the things I've been saying for years. And she goes, my allergist said that you were right. I go, yeah, Michelle, I know I was right. I was giving you the right information, but she had to go to the allergist to really get confirmed about it. But now she's starting to really take back her diet and eliminate a lot of stuff so that she can find out kind of what the culprits are of some of her health issues. But segueing into something else now, the Carnivorist, what is the next? What's going to be happening? We got the Carnivorist Chats podcast that's continuing to go. What else is on the horizon for James?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah, so folks should understand too that I also picked that name, the Carnivorist, on purpose with a T on the end. And the reason that I did that is because I knew starting off my journey into adding animal foods back into my diet that it was going to be just that. It was going to be an ongoing journey of experimentation. And I looked up online, if you remember, there was a movie called The Machinist, but there's I think
Christian Bale.
Christian Bale, excuse me, Christian Bale. So I kind of took inspiration from that. And then I looked into the etymology of the word, with the suffix, the ist on there, and things like dentist and psychiatrist. Those are people. A psychiatrist is someone who studies in the way of psyche in the brain, and the dentist studies teeth. So I thought carnivorist, this is a great way to call myself for someone that's studying or learning about this way of eating. So I continue to do this to this day. It's the reason that I started the podcast. Once I knew the benefits, I wanted to get the message out there, have folks like you on, have folks like Dr. Chafee, who's coming back. I'm very privileged to have him next week, to have thought leaders in the space. And I'm just started season 3, which is, I never thought in a million years that I'd be doing that. And I've been very blessed to have some wonderful guests. I want to continue on with this with my social media presence, just build it slowly and organically. I'm not looking to, just go crazy with it, because I do have a day job. I do this all in my off time, which is, as you know, can be challenging. I know you're a gym instructor amongst many other things, and doing the podcast, it's a lot of work. Like getting the interviews done, editing them, getting the clips up for social media. And it can be a ton of work, but it's such a fulfilling thing to do. I never realized how fulfilling it was. But yeah, I definitely am going to continue on this vein and continue on the Carnivorist on all my platforms. Continue to put out good content in terms of the podcast. I really want to, there's some certain people that I'm hoping to get on. I'd love to get Dr. Baker on soon. I'd love to get Dr. Barry on at some point if I can. But my main thing is striking a balance, as you're doing, with thought leaders and then folks that are just regular people like you and I that are looking to share their experience and their healing journeys with us, and then get that message out there. So yeah, that's kind of what's coming up with me. As I mentioned and alluded to earlier, I'm kind of studying in the background to become a personal trainer on the side. It's just something that I'm inspired to do. It's going to take me a little longer than I had first hoped, because it's pretty in depth, man. When I got the curriculum for it, it's and rightly so. I mean, when you're dealing with people's health, and people come to you, Tony, as you know, with physical challenges, you've got to be aware of how to handle those in a professional manner. So I'm doing that in the background, and yeah, just looking forward to, from going, no pun intended, from strength to strength on everything.
Mm-hmm. And then I think one of the times we were talking beforehand, you're doing some kettlebell certification as well, or is it a part of the certification?
It is part of the certification. Okay. So it's an adjunct that I'll be doing, but I want to just highlight what you are putting out there, and your kettlebell instructional stuff too, man. That's awesome that you tagged me in the other day. And thank you again for allowing my listeners to have a little bit of a discount on your kettlebell program. And that's awesome.
Yeah. That's the one thing, is when you're talking about your home gym and other people now going to big box gyms isn't really, we've made this shift of, you don't need to be getting in your car, going 45 minutes to a gym, and then coming all the way back. So that's why I always have to plug Coach Steve Carlson, and we created the Strength Collective just so people can have programming at home, and all you need is a kettlebell. You're gonna get good programming at home. Just 1, 2, maybe even 3 kettlebells. But as you go through your training, you're going to be doing all the kettlebell stuff. And I'm excited to see some videos of you swinging a kettlebell. I'm all for it.
Oh, totally, man.
And in the future, is there any other projects that you want to accomplish or start or achieve in the next few years?
Besides attaining the PT designation and, starting down that road as well, I think that's really where my focus is. I'd really like to get, obviously, the podcast and my YouTube views up, so reaching more people. But again, that's organic growth. I'm very flattered that I just passed the 5,000 mark on Instagram, which is not a lot, but it's, hey, I started awesome. At 0. And so I'm very thankful for the people there. And, I finally got my YouTube channel above 1,000 subscribers. So that's a big milestone. And then even on Twitter, I've got a couple of thousand there now. So just keep that content going, just keep the message getting out there. But yeah, that's where it's at, man. And just building back my health every day and, striving for the future, my mental health. I'm reading a ton of books right now and just educating myself on as much as I can, because once you start going down these rabbit holes, man, you just want to learn more and more, don't you?
Yeah. And thank you for putting all the information out there and your story. There's a lot of people that can connect with your story, and you are a true inspiration. And I really mean that genuinely.
Thank you, Tony. I appreciate it, man. And likewise, right back at you, man. Keep doing what you're doing. I'm so happy that you started this podcast. And again, man, it's an honor. It's an honor to chat with you. So anytime you want me back, I'm here to chat, my friend.
Absolutely. Well, James, again, thank you so much for being on the show. And to all listeners, thank you again for listening to another episode of the Primal Foundations podcast.